CJRed presents Accidental Proposal by CJRed. Chapter 14. Secrets Out. Everyone was frozen in horror for a moment as they took in the ramifications of what this could mean, the engagement being announced like this before some wizards were warned. Ginny jumped up. "Quick! We can flee them from McGonagall's office. We have to head them off. You go find Draco before they do." Hermione shook her head. "No, you won't be able to stop them alone." Pansy rushed over. "We can guard Draco. We will keep him in here. They can't get into our common room. Go!" Hermione and Ginny took off at a run with the three Slytherin girls hot on their heels. Draco and Theo were at the pitch for practice, so Hermione knew that they would have to grab them and get everyone back to the common room. Ginny and Hermione took off down a side passage that would get them to the headmistress's office quicker, while the three other girls took a shortcut to the Great Hall. When the duo got to the gargoyle guarding the headmistress's office, they were panting with exhaustion. Ginny rattled off the password, some phrase Hermione didn't catch, and they stepped onto the staircase. McGonagall looked the two girls over, her face curious. "I was just about to send for you. Why are Potter and Weasley coming through my fire from the Ministry? I thought they had training." Ginny was trying to catch her breath as Hermione shook her head. "They're after Draco. Don't let them through." McGonagall's eyes went wide. "Oh, well, dear me. I already told them." The fire blazed and outstepped two very angry wizards. Hermione, still gasping, rushed forward to head them off. "Just calm down." Ron shoved her, and she fell into Harry. Suddenly there was a large bang, and Ginny flew out of the way as Ron rushed out. McGonagall looked scandalized. "Mr. Weasley, how dare you attack one of my students?" Harry was glaring after Ron, and then shoved Hermione aside, rushing off after him. Ginny threw Hermione a wide-eyed look, and they both took off after the raging wizards, with Ginny throwing over her shoulders. "No need to trouble yourself, headmistress. We'll calm them down and send them back through." Hermione caught a glimpse of McGonagall lowering herself back to her chair, looking greatly put out. They caught up to them in the entryway with the half-full Great Hall looking on curiously. Ginny was yelling at Ron, with her arms around Harry, who seemed to be calming marginally, or at least he wasn't quite as enraged as Ron. Hermione rushed forward, but before she could reach him, Ron had turned and found Blaise and Draco walking down from looked like the hospital wing. Ron's bellow of rage echoed off the hall as he raised his wand and fired off a hex at Draco. Hermione threw herself in front of Draco, utterly by instinct, and then everything went black. There were 2, maybe 3 moments in Draco's life that he could remember in vivid detail, and all 3 of them revolved around the witch who was currently falling to the floor in front of him. How she got there in time he would never know. Just as everyone realized that Hermione had been hit and all hell broke loose in the entryway, he managed to catch her. Theo had walked through the door with Pansy, just as his sister had thrown herself in front of the hex that was meant for Draco. Not realizing that it was Ron, her friend and an Auror in training, who had hexed his sister, he turned and threw a hex directly at the person responsible. Ginny was screaming in rage and had hit her brother with a hex as well, followed by Blaise, who had drawn his own wand as Hermione had started to fall. What resulted was one for the record books. Ronald Weasley would spend 4 days in the hospital, which was exactly what the Prat deserved for not controlling his temper, according to his sister. Hermione regained consciousness that night, and thanks to the quick reflexes of her fiancé, she only suffered a mild headache. Well, a mild headache and a very angry brother, best friend, fiancé, headmistress, and, well, it seemed everyone was rather snippy with her, really. Even Luna seemed annoyed. Draco was seething. "Never do something so foolish again." Hermione snorted at him. "It was instinctual, and I got my shield at least partially up." Theo was finally starting to see the humor of the situation, although only in regard to the fact that his sister had saved Draco from a hex. He still got rather pissy when he thought about the fact that his sister had been hexed. Harry was in trouble with both of the Weasley women. Whenever his girlfriend grew tired of berating him, her mother stepped in to take over the job. Draco actually was starting to feel rather sorry for the bloke, although, when he remembered that he hadn't stopped his friend from resorting to hexes before he had all the information, that pity dissolved rather quickly. Ron was sleeping, but he would probably be in for his turn with the Weasley women next, and Draco could only hope he would be present for that dressing down. Hermione's hand was cold in his own, and he shifted, watching her closely as she grimaced. "Ginny, my head is killing me," she said softly when her friend's voice started to raise. Harry flashed her a look of relief that was tempered by shame as his eyes met Draco's. Pansy had taken over explaining what had happened, her tone and body language letting Harry know that she was not in a forgiving mood for the damage done to her new friend by his hot-headedness. Bop had shown up and wailed so much that they had been forced to sedate the poor elf. Thankfully, Hermione didn't realize that yet, because she had still been knocked out when that all happened. They didn't really want to consider how annoyed she would be that the poor elf had been so distressed. Draco looked up as the hospital doors swung open again, and the headmistress entered, looking supremely upset. "Potter, you may stay the night. I spoke with your superiors and the minister, who said that you will both be facing disciplinary action for this stunt. Molly, you may stay as well, if you wish. 2 of your children being sent to the hospital wing certainly warrants our hospitality." Theo looked up confused. 2? Molly glared at him. "That young lady is as much my daughter as she is your sister, young man. My husband and I made a vow to watch out for her as her family years ago." Draco went a bit pale and looked at Theo, who was nodding, his face tightening, but his eyes flashing with what looked like relief. "She needs a mum," was all he said before he slouched back into his chair. Molly snorted. "So do you, apparently. I want you to take that contract straight to the Burrow and have a sit-down with Arthur and Percy." Theo's eyes widened, and he looked at the headmistress, who was sighing and nodding. "I think that would be wise, Mr. Knott. Take Miss Parkinson with you, seeing as how she redrafted it." Theo glanced down at Hermione, clearly torn, and then nodded, clapping Draco on the back as he headed out. Molly sank down into a chair, looking exhausted. "I want this story from you two. How exactly did this happen again?" Hermione winced and looked at Draco pleadingly. He sighed and nodded before he repeated the story, pausing to check with Hermione that he had remembered the phrasing correctly. When he was finished, Molly was pale and shaking her head. "Oh, goodness! That's that, then, isn't it, Minerva?" Hermione was fighting to stay awake, and before Minerva replied, Draco was pulling a blanket up around her and looking up at Madame Pomfrey, who smiled at him reassuringly. "Just a sleep draught, dear. She needs rest." Minerva gave a soft snort, and then said, "Molly, they really have left no loopholes I can think of. Even if they don't hold a ceremony, they are as good as married as soon as that date passes." Molly frowned. "Can they get an annulment?" Draco stiffened and looked up. He hadn't thought of that. It wasn't done in pure-blood families. Once the contract was drafted, Minerva cut off his thoughts. "No, Molly, this isn't a typical agreement or union. This is ancient magic. I am not sure they could even divorce, to be honest. That's why the families circumvent this spell. Honestly, Mr. Malfoy, what were you thinking?" Draco flinched. "I forgot she was a Knott." Everyone was silent, and then Molly sighed, rubbing her hand wearily on her forehead. "Have you begun courting?" Draco felt his face flush as he replied, "No, ma'am. We have a date set for this Friday, if she is well enough." Ginny snorted. "She will be. She just has to find something to wear. We were going to ask for permission to go shopping tomorrow during our free time." Molly smiled softly. "Hermione agreed to go shopping?" Ginny shrugged. "Well, I suppose so. Those Slytherin girls can be very persuasive." Draco snorted at that and shared a smirk with Ginny. Molly sat up frowning. "Minerva, I think you can agree that they have earned a bit of a break. Given the gossip this incident has caused, the girls might like to get out of the castle anyway. Ginny certainly has my permission to go." Draco watched as the headmistress paused and then nodded. "They fought a bloody war, Molly. I suppose shopping couldn't kill them." Draco winced at that analogy, but kept quiet as the adults left the room, and Ginny sank down, holding a reserved Potter's hand. Finally, Draco sighed to break the silence. "You could have just sent a bloody howler, Potter." Potter looked up and flushed before he shrugged. "Wasn't much time to ponder that, Malfoy." Ginny went back to glaring at her brother. "That stupid prat could have killed someone." Draco grunted in agreement as Harry sighed. "Cut him some slack, will you, Gin? He wasn't himself." Ginny glowered. "I didn't see Bill or George storming through the castle like that." Potter winced. "Well, Gin, neither of them ever kissed her." Draco sat up as rage moved through his gut. Come again? Ginny rolled her eyes in disgust. You are such a git, Harry. Draco's eyes narrowed on them, and he was contemplating causing Potter bodily harm when Ginny said soothingly, Calm down, Draco. It was the day of the battle, and it was just the once, as far as I know. They held hands for the rest of the week, and then... She shrugged, frowning and looking at Harry. Did they ever tell you why they broke up? Harry snorted. Yeah, 2 days after the battle when they tried to kiss again and couldn't stop giggling. Draco deflated a bit and found his signature smirk. That had to be hard on his pride. Harry shook his head and glared at him. No, it wasn't. Draco shrugged and slouched down in his chair as exhaustion started to hit him. He had already taken a bludger to the shoulder today, and now all this had happened. Ginny sighed, looking at the clock by the door. I have rounds tonight. She leaned down and kissed her boyfriend. You can sleep with us in the head's quarters. Have Creature make you a bed up there, she said softly, giving him a look that Draco interpreted to mean the man would probably be sleeping with her. And then he watched as the pretty redhead rushed out, still mumbling about what an idiot her brother was. Harry folded his arms and the two wizards had a stare-off until Madame Pomfrey cut in. Off with you, Mr. Potter. Potter didn't budge. What about him? Draco snorted and said calmly, I am actually a student here, and my fiancé is in the hospital. Until her brother returns, I will be sitting here. Her attacker, after all, is in the bed next to her. He kept his voice firm and saw the flash of annoyance cross Harry's face as the word sank in. Madame Pomfrey hesitated a moment, and then said briskly, Potter, out! Draco tried to hide his glee as he watched Potter being shoved out of the ward. How is the shoulder, Mr. Malfoy? Sore. I carried her up here, he said, rolling at it and wincing. Madame Pomfrey nodded and rushed over, flicking her wand so that a screen went up around Ron, and then another so that Hermione was isolated. A section was left open where another bed appeared with Bop in it, and then a third bed appeared as well. Well, in you go then, Mr. Malfoy. I want to observe that shoulder tonight. Draco felt relief rush through him as he realized what she was doing, and without saying a word he ripped off his robes, changed into the hospital pajamas, and crawled into the bed. Do I need to give you a sleeping draught as well? Draco snorted. Thanks, but no. Just make sure the weasel over there stays asleep. Madame Pomfrey looked insulted, but bustled off. At some point in the early morning, Hermione became aware of sounds around her. Slowly, she opened her eyes and realized she was still in the hospital wing. She saw that there was a screen up around her, but there were also beds on either side of her, which was highly unusual. She turned to her right and gave a soft gasp. A house elf was snoring beside her. Was that Bop? She was pretty sure it was, but she was relieved to see that the elf looked unharmed, just in a deep sleep. Turning to her left, she let out another gasp, this one louder. Draco! What was he doing here? She started to get up, feeling an overwhelming need to check on him. She was sore, and she could taste the aftertaste of Poppy's favorite sleeping draught. Slowly, she moved towards the sleeping blonde man, trying to see any noticeable injuries. Had she not gotten in front of him before Ron's curse hit? Since she was only slightly sore, she knew that her shield had to have helped her avoid severe injury. She shook her head as she tried to remember the previous day. Draco had been sitting with her, and he had looked fine. Angry, but fine. Had something happened to him after she had gone to sleep? Had Ron woken up and hurt him? She couldn't imagine that Harry would have, not with Ginny there to watch him. She reached up and pushed the hair off his face gently, and then let out a gasp as his hand wrapped around her wrist, a bit painfully. His eyes flew open and met hers. His grip instantly loosened, and with a small grimace, he moved to link his fingers with hers and then pulled her down onto his bed. You shouldn't be up, he said softly, pulling her down so that she was laying next to him on the narrow bed. Hermione felt her heart rate triple and lost her breath, unable to reply. This was the closest she had ever been to Draco, and although it was startling, it felt right somehow. She turned so that she could look at him. Why are you here? She asked in a whisper. Draco smirked at her and played with a strand of her hair as he moved so that she was tucked under the blanket with him. I had a bad shoulder from practice earlier. I got hit by a bludger. It's fine, really, but Madame Pomfrey let me sleep here tonight. Hermione snorted softly and reached up to trace his face. She had always thought he was beautiful, but up close he was simply breathtaking. Her fingers slowed as they reached his lips, and she felt him let out a soft breath before he caught her hand and kissed her fingers softly. He moved her hand down to his chest and held it there. "How are you feeling?" he asked after a moment. Hermione shrugged and snuggled into the warm body next to her. She was fighting a yawn. "I feel fine. A bit sore. Tired." Draco was rubbing small circles into her back. "Go back to sleep." Hermione tensed for a moment and then asked, "Here?" Draco sighed. "If you wish." Hermione smiled and relaxed as she rubbed her face into his warm chest. "Theo will be upset." She felt him chuckle softly. "I can put you back in your bed before he shows up." Hermione yawned, feeling sleep start to reclaim her. "Don't hurt your shoulder carrying me." She heard Draco snort, but then she felt him kiss her temple. "Sleep." And she did, because she felt safe and warm, and she trusted Draco would make sure she ended up back in her bed, even if she didn't really wish to. She fell asleep with a smile on her face as she realized that if anyone had ever told her she would be falling asleep in the arms of Draco Malfoy, she would have told them to check themselves into St. Mungo's. Draco felt the woman in his arms relax into sleep and let out a long breath as anxiety left him. Merlin, he was going to be in trouble if Theo caught him with Hermione in his arms, but he simply did not have the ability to let her go just yet. Instead, he snuggled her into him, wrapped his leg around hers, and let out a contented sigh. This felt right, holding her, which should have scared the magic out of him. He let his hands trail down her back softly before he settled them into her thick curls. She felt perfect, smelled perfect, and he even found her soft snoring didn't bother him. He closed his eyes and let himself relax to the sound of her deep breathing, occasional snores, and steady heartbeat. Something had shifted in him today. That little bit he had been holding back. It had disappeared the moment she had thrown herself in front of that curse aimed at him. His arms tightened around her, and his fingers pulled at her hair, causing her to shift and settle against him so that her cheek was on his chest. He could feel her hot breath through his shirt, and he had to shift. He really should move her, but he found that he didn't have the strength. Hermione had melted a wall around his heart that he had never thought would fall. She had lifted a darkness inside of him that had been there since the start of the Second War. He was going to spend the rest of his life with the woman wrapped in his arms. Draco was pretty sure that he had fallen in love with his fiancée yesterday. Now he just had to get her to fall in love with him. He wasn't good enough for her, he knew that. However, he wasn't worried. Hermione would never let him fall under the sway of a dark wizard like his mother had allowed his father. And Hermione was a woman of amazing integrity and forgiveness. His arms tightened around her again as he drifted off with a smile. Hermione would make him a better man. Hermione would save him, and he would give her the world because she deserved it.